I'll be talking about the importance of active engagement, navigating organizational participation in decision making for COM 616, Queen's University of Charlotte, Summer 2, 2016. My inquiry project was based on personal experience that I had working over 15 years in higher education administration, staff, and teaching. One particular memory that this case study is built on is one of my first experiences in what we have was called a case study from the Higher Learning Commission. The whole premise of that study was for employees to do data collection, analysis, and evaluation of current employee practices. We were trying to see where we had been, where we were at that moment in time, and where we were going. That was sort of my first taste of active engagement. Active engagement creates a community of memory, which in other words, some organizations, all level employees from the janitors to the CEO participate in major decisions. That statement has stuck with me for over 15 years because that very statement was uttered by my administrator at the time. That always had some sort of an impact on me, and I never forgot what that really meant. After I left that first institution, I went to a similar institution of higher education, and I still saw the same spirit there of being involved collectively as an institution. I believe with our kind of business that we are in, I believe participatory strategic decision making is a perfect fit because it takes all levels of faculty, staff, and administrators to make the colleges function and run right for the students and the communities that they serve. Involving employees in strategic decision making does in fact impact employee turnover and employee job satisfaction. I was thrilled to be a part of that steering committee. At the time, I thought it might have been a bigger deal than it really was looking back, but as a young professional, that buoyed my confidence, and I believe that led me to strive even further in my career. So you can see the psychological effect that it had on this young 20-something. So the purpose of my proposed case study will examine and provide managers and employees with tools and knowledge to increase organizational participation and eliminate polarization and increase job satisfaction and organizational ownership among employees. The keywords throughout this study I want you all to be aware of is active engagement, dialogic communication, organizational, and strategic. And you will see those keywords sprinkled throughout my presentation and my report, which I also have linked on my WordPress blog. The findings of my study were not earth-shaking, but they were very simple and very straightforward. First of all, strategic decision-making with a collaboration between employees and managers was instituted for organizational self-studies like the one my organization went through. Committees, including steering committees, was composed of not managers, but employees from each level in the organization. I believe which made a huge impact on how the whole project was perceived. Sometimes the traditional managerial hierarchy can get in the way, and it was refreshing to see that abandoned for the decision-making during this self-study project. And active engagement played a specific role in this project because many of the decisions and projects made from the implementation of this project are still in place in this institution today. And I am very aware of that because I'm considered also an alumni, so I'm active in keeping up with their advancements and how they are serving that community I was a part of. Lastly, including all employees as stakeholders in the organization's due diligence by breaking barriers caused by procedures and practices that employees often inferred as political. That was the last finding that I found to be cornerstone to this. So in other words, when you make an employee feel like they are a stakeholder in that organization and the manager shows due diligence in making sure that that is felt, then the barriers are broken down. The polarization, the political feelings will go away. Politics is a major killer in organizations. I know it's also the lifeblood at times of keeping it competitive, but at the same time, you lose employees because of it. As I discussed throughout this case study, It all goes back to that community of memory. The community of memory, it serves as a central location of active engagement for the organization as a whole. In other words, it is the heart of that organization. It is the breathing, living apparatus in which that organization is, what it's become. And communicative practices are ongoing. They promote and ultimately protect the good of the organization. However, at times, if those communicative practices are negative, then it can preserve the negative that is within the organization. And I have seen that happen too. Unfortunately, towards the end of my tenure at that first institution, that is where I saw it going. However, I believe the tide in the wind direction in that changed, thankfully. The greater good and protection for the organization lies within the community of memory. I basically said that in the second bullet point of my presentation, but I think it bears worth being said in a different way because it gives you a different perspective. And finally, the community of memory is accountable to the demands of the historical moment. As we said, the historical moment, we remember those things, those moments in time that shape, and in other words, those moments in time that shape that organization, that era, maybe the economic conditions, the political conditions, maybe it was in the height of the 60s or in wartime. You can actually see those historical moments even many, many years later when you go to work because there's old practices and old stances that sometimes never go away no matter how hard the organization tries to make them fade into the distance. I could talk all day about community of memory, but just what is it? I thought it was good to stop at this point and examine just what that phrase really means. It's the what and the how of organization functions that form it, and it's also the frame. It frames the organization's identity and its political lifetime, and can also be referred to as the organization's conscience, which I believe sums that up perfectly. So how does community of memory and active engagement link together? Simply by those three statements I just reiterated. The conclusions I drew were simple. First, I found out that active engagement theory is not the cure-all, but it can offer a glimpse in how to preserve the good of an organization, which lies within that community of memory. And then the communicative social practices drives the organization's structure and function, and the community of memory plays an important role. So you can see how they both are hand in hand. Community of memory and active engagement. Remember that and ponder that as I go on. The implications of this case study was that active engagement can be ambiguous. That's partly due to the different meanings it holds in different contexts of the communication practices of the organization. Remember, again, it comes with that community of memory. Also, predisposition plays a role in how participatory decision-making is viewed. One of the research that I read, articles that I had read for this participation, for this whole project, talked about the data. It showed that when political levels were high, so were levels of participatory decision-making. In other words, there was a lot of managers were scrambling to make sure that employees were involved in a fake sense of participatory strategic decision-making in order to cover up or downplay the political activities. Such a sad commentary, but that does happen in big business. And the greatest resource is the human resource. At times, that's ignored among the pace of daily routines by managers. I always say, I believe that the human resource is one of the most treasured resource in an organization, but it's the most overlooked. As I think about suggestions for further research regarding this topic, there's two things that I really suggest that researchers should look at. First of all, data needs to be collected and measured from projects heavily influenced by active employee decision making. So any kind of project that was implemented or overtaken by mainly employees and no managerial influence, the results, maybe the life of the project, should be the data that's collected. And then also conduct surveys and interviews with former and current employees who were employed by the organization during certain time periods or eras of that organization. I do admit that similar data has been collected and measured, but I believe this really narrows it down even further into being more specific. In other words, was the employee activity really central to the success of these projects or not? It's also suggested that active engagement not be the only theory of focus when conducting further research. At this point, I'm not for sure which other research theory would I incorporate. I believe I would have to go back and reread the literature reviews that I have went through during my research and rethink my experiences, as well as go back and review in our textbook the different theories, frameworks that would apply. So finally, you will see my case study references. And I highly suggest that if you have the time and you are very interested in this subject, to read the articles by Ashmose and Witt. Those were two very, very interesting articles that contained a wealth of data that I was unable to include every single bit of it into this case study or my report or this digital presentation due to time constraint.